This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. In particular, this month is being sponsored by Lindsay Marie Trebet and Nick Martin. I thank you both so very much. And if you want to become a patron, you can do so at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight is going to be another listener story edition, and I am here with Mr. Timothy Renner of Strange Familiars.
Hello.
And there's some really interesting stuff we're going to go through here. The first one we're going to address is part 2 of a story that we talked about last time on the Glimmer Man. And there was a red flag in this one that might have stopped me from reading it. The person who... What was that?
Before we get into the follow-up, did you get the message from, I think it was a listener named Dave. He sent it to me. That was a story about basically the tech involved that can really make that kind of Glimmer Man thing, like it's real, the tech.
Yes. Yeah, it is real.
Yeah. And
because Camilio kind of deals with that, and the author there has shown that this tech does exist now.
Yeah, this was a whole article Dave Woj sent. It was about a DJ somewhere up in your area, I think, who was basically, they were surveilling him using this technology, and they literally sent him to an insane asylum. Eventually, through one way or another, he proved it was true and proved it was, technology that was doing it, and that he was just kind of picked at random by these universities who were using this technology, and they were literally surveilling him. So,
I have not seen that article.
I'll try to dig it up and forward it to you, but it's absolutely real.
Yes, yeah, I knew it was real. But we'll get to the red flag as we tell this story. It may not be a red flag. John, who sent us the story, I asked him if he believed the person who was telling him the story, and he said absolutely. So, I mean, with any of these stories, the thing you got to remember is none of us were there other than the person who's relaying the story. So we don't know what actually happened.
Exactly.
I choose to lean more toward the side of believing people than not believing them, because I don't want to not believe someone and have it be true. Because that makes them feel more isolated than they probably already do. And
Mm-hmm.
I would rather be, quote, duped than not believe someone who really could use someone to believe them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
and there have been stories that people, well, I even questioned, and then got more information and went, oh, wow, yeah, no, this is absolutely, this person is absolutely telling the truth.
Yeah, and sometimes when people are good writers, too, it kind of hurts their story, believe it or not. If someone can tell their story in a very eloquent way with detail, people are like, no, this sounds like it's made up. And it's like, no, it's just that they know how to tell a story.
Right.
All right, Glimmer Man Part 2 from 2011. After the first encounter with Glimmer Man, I had a series of extremely odd recurring dreams. These dreams lasted for about 2 weeks. They happened nightly. In the dreams, I was in the woods and always found these out-of-place staircases. Some of these staircases were winding up and down and extremely elaborate. They looked like they were ripped straight out of a house and placed randomly in the woods with zero rhyme or reason to them. The high strange list doesn't stop there, though. One night, I was laying in bed watching a show on Netflix when I paused it to get up for a drink in my kitchen. I walked back to my bedroom, and what I saw stunned me so badly that I dropped the glass of tea onto the floor and my blood ran cold. What I saw in the bed was me lying there watching Netflix. It wasn't paused like I had left it when I got up, either. All of a sudden, the me in the bed paused Netflix and got up and walked into the kitchen exactly like I did minutes earlier. He acted like he didn't see me, and my reaction was to move out of the way when me walked by me. I walked in there, and the other me said, "You didn't expect this, did you? We are the old ones, and we come from the triangles in the sky. Find the staircase in the woods, and you will find your answer." What happens next is hard to describe and put into words. Picture, if you will, hitting a rewind button and reality all around you turns into a blur and it feels like time is bending around you. I found myself back in bed after that blur happened watching Netflix with a glass of tea on my nightstand. I sit there confused about what just happened. Am I losing my mind? Losing my damn mind, I thought. I suddenly felt extremely sleepy and tired, like I was coming down from a major adrenaline rush. Then the dream started again. This time I was standing in a field in broad daylight, and the sky was full of these black triangle UFOs. They were everywhere you looked. It was a massive fleet of them. Each one had a white light at each apex and a red light dead center. They were triangular shaped. When I woke up the next morning, I remembered what was told to me last night. Find the stairs in the woods. But this seemed like a fool's errand to me. So a week later, I was in the woods just exploring because I always feel at peace in nature. I was in an area I've been 100 times before, and there it was, plain as day. In a small clearing was this staircase. I examined it, and it wasn't connected to a foundation or anything. In fact, it looked like a well-made new staircase to me. I had a sudden urge to go up the staircase. When halfway up, I had a sudden sensation run over me that gave me this fight or flight feeling. I looked up, and there he was. Glimmer Man was perched on top of the staircase in a squat position looking at me. This is when the static-like voice rang out with this echoey pattern saying, "We are the old ones, and we come from the triangles in the sky." The Glimmer Man entity at the top of the staircase clearly said this to me, and he started to beckon me to come with him, but I didn't. I stood my ground. That is when it said, "I will show you where we come from, but you must trust me." At this point, I realized that this staircase must be some kind of portal to another world or dimension. I knew this because Glimmerman waved his hand at the shimmering doorway, and a shimmering doorway appeared at the top of the staircase. So I denied him and said I'm not going, and in fact to leave me alone. This is when Glimmerman started to laugh in that static echo chamber-like voice, and where his left eye would be blinked this purple hue, and he dashed through the portal and was gone. The shimmering portal vanished, so I was there in my thoughts once again. Did this really happen? Am I going crazy? Anyway, I did a lot of online research after this and come to find out there are a lot of these random staircases are found in the woods around the world. I believe these things are portals and the creatures people run into and report coming out of these things. Let me read that again. I believe these things are portals and the creatures people run into and report are coming out of these things. That sounded better. Who goes through the trouble of hauling a fully intact staircase to a remote random spot in the wood and plops it down for a prank? Nobody, that's who. And then we all know about the black triangle UFOs. How is all of this stuff even connected? Glimmerman, reoccurring dreams, staircases in the woods, and black triangles. He says that is the last time I saw this Glimmerman entity. And he also adds that he went back the next day, and there was no sign that the staircase had ever been there. He also said in late 2011, when he went back to that spot again where the staircase was, he saw faces in the ground with with eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and they looked like they were in sheer torment and agony. They looked really messed up, mutated faces. There were 6 in total, he said. This freaked him out so bad that he has not been in that same area again. He had a bit of PTSD from being in the military, coupled with these encounters, and that's why he doesn't want to go live on the show and talk to them, and it's easier for them to relay him through our listener, John. So, the first thing, the staircases in the woods originated on the No Sleep Reddit.
Yep.
It was invented, much like a lot of things have been invented in fiction before they became real. And this is kind of the half red flag here, because there are no actual encounters with these staircases like this. I've looked pretty thoroughly, and I have yet to find anyone who has evidence of one of these actually existing. There are a ton of stories about them. Channel Zero's third season used the idea for their anthology series there. So it doesn't mean that he didn't actually encounter a staircase in the woods. He had the dreams beforehand, but to me, this sound, like we are the old ones and come from the triangles in the sky, sounds like something you'd get in a horror movie.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing with the staircases is it's kind of like, and we've talked about this before. It's like Slender Man. So like, have we made it a thing now?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
where it's someone came up with it, sure, but then does it make the leap like a tulpa into reality in a sense, or do people imbue it with a power that it didn't have previously, or with a mystique, or however you want to put it? But yeah, it's I just wish we could ask follow-up questions.
And it's not just Slender Man. I mean, the first time a UFO killed the power in a car was, I think it was a Twilight Zone episode.
Oh yeah,
It was definitely fiction. If it wasn't Twilight Zone, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but there's a number of these situations where the first time these things have happened were in fiction, and then they take on a life of the moment, even if the fiction wasn't well known. It's almost like once the idea gets out there, then the potential of it actually manifesting is there.
because the other is reading our fiction and watching our TV.
Yeah, or it's in the general idea of us,
Yeah, yeah,
just like UFOs seem to stay a step ahead of us in technology.
yeah. No, I definitely think so. I think it's more of it becomes woven into the fabric of our sort of collective unconscious and manifest however we manifest these things.
And I mean, I also can't, as you said, this is real tech, and it has been used to mess with people. And anyone who wants the Camelio story, go back and find that on Where Did the Road Go, because that I think was 2 parts with him. The book is fantastic, and the interview is really interesting. But it looks like they just picked someone and started messing with them to see what they could do. And so, I mean, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't maybe do this to John's friend here. I mean, because
especially ex-military,
exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe they're testing this stuff out on him. How can they make him think he's crazy? Who knows what they're trying to do? Or was he imagining it? Was he going into a part of the woods that maybe tricked off something in his brain and caused a hallucination or an altered state of consciousness? Someone once left a comment saying there should be a drinking game to how quickly I'll come to altered state of consciousness. And that's the thing with me, though. I think a lot of this stuff does happen in an altered state, but that does not mean I don't think it's real.
Exactly.
I think it's real in a different way. I don't think it's as objective.
It's very hard to explain this to people. That when I say archetype, I don't mean it's all in your mind.
Right. And I mean, reality is a little bit different for everyone. And I think when we're in an altered state, that difference extends a little further. You can pick up other things or see other things that other people may not. And I'm also fascinated by the times you see encounters where, you have 4 people there and 2 people see something and 2 don't. And because that's that, how do you really put that together with? I mean, 2 people aren't going to hallucinate the same thing generally,
right?
Especially if they're not talking about it. And I've had at least 2 experiences like that where me and another person saw something and other people didn't, and we saw the exact same thing. So I mean, the way our brains work and the way our perception works, it's hard to say. I mean, he had the dreams about the staircases. If he was somewhere in the woods that maybe triggered this off, maybe he started seeing a staircase. Maybe he had, a Glimmer Man encounter, and when he saw the staircase, or when he entered this altered state, the Glimmer Man showed up on the staircase. I mean, it definitely, if this is an honest account, then it sounds like there was a lot of weird stuff going on at this time for this guy.
Yeah.
And it's real hard to pin down whether or not it would have been something, like we said, like a military experiment on him or something more going on. Black Triangle UFOs are also often associated with the military.
Yes, they are.
So, I guess people can take that as they will. Like I said, the red flag to me was just that, the staircase thing doesn't really exist, but it doesn't mean that it won't start to.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily dismissible because that's in there. It's just one of those things that popped up and made me go, All right. Any other comments on that?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. I would just add that, you know, we don't have to be so binary in our thinking about altered states either. It probably works on a, you know, like a sliding scale. You know, we're probably always in one form of reaching an altered state or another. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
There are extreme altered states, you know, and there's probably somewhere in the middle, and there's probably less altered states. But it's you know, it's probably a sliding scale there.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably pretty accurate. I had another one here I wanted to follow this up with, and I'm not sure where it was. Because it also had mentioned dreams of UFOs. No. I guess we'll have to find it as we go through. All right. We're going to go with this one just because this one's creepy. I don't know that there's much to it, but it's creepy. And let's see if he gave his name. Zenji. He says he considers this to be a fun story, but maybe it's just a result of his odd sense of humor. I'm an expatriate living in Japan for about 15 years now. I consider this my home and have even taken a Japanese name. I intend to naturalize at some point in the future. This happened about 10 years ago. I was working in a town called Masato in Saitama Prefecture, Japan. Masato is a suburb of Tokyo, approximately an hour north of downtown Tokyo proper by train. I had just finished work, and it was a cold, gray March evening, about 5 p.m. I walked from work to the bus stop in order to catch the bus to the train station. There, I'd get my usual train back to Tokyo, where I lived. It was a windy evening, which made the weather even colder than it would have been usually been. And as I stood waiting for the bus, I could tell it would start raining any minute. Across the street from the bus stop, there was an older-style phone booth. It was one of the type of which, if you went inside and closed the doors, you'd be well protected from the elements, kind of like the ones Clark Kent would duck into in Man of Steel, or to become the Man of Steel. Anyway, I thought to myself, I don't want to wait for the bus in this blowing rain, and so I crossed the narrow two-lane back street, which was fairly desolate at 5 p.m., even with a block of public apartment buildings on one side and an elementary school on the other. I got into the phone booth and I closed the door. There were no passerbys. It was definitely an old booth and obviously pretty beat up once you got inside. The circular fluorescent light in the center of the ceiling was half burnt out, which only added to the dreariness of an already gray evening, which would become night within 30 minutes. Surrounding the light, there was a circular vent for the fan, which was whirring away with a kind of sick sound. I say sick because it sounded like it was trying to hang on and doing its job, but it may not be surviving for many more days. Kind of wabi-sabi, sadly making its way toward an inevitable end. What do you do when you're killing time in a phone booth? You pick up the receiver, of course, and see if there's a dial tone. So I picked up the receiver, and it was dead. There was no dial tone, but you could hear that the circuit was still on. By now, the rain had begun to fall lightly. The bus was still nowhere to be seen, so next I began pushing numbers on the keypad. I don't remember which numbers I pressed to start, probably 0, because I was just trying to tell if the receiver would come to life and sound a tone, but nothing happened. Each time I pressed a key, I just heard a tick in the receiver, like the pad was putting through an electrical pulse, but not sounding tones. I pressed a few more random keys with the same result, as well as giving a requisite jiggle to the coin return. Then I noticed that it was a good bet this booth hadn't been used in a while. Everything inside was either dirty or covered with enough set-in dust to make it feel gritty. There were even small spider webs in the corners of the ceiling, and judging by the few cocooned insects, I would have said that it hadn't been maintained in quite a while. Still, no bus. Then I kind of chuckled to myself, and I cocked a little wry smile. What are the series of numbers this particular scenario call for to be keyed into that keypad? With the receiver in my left hand up to my ear, my right hand reached to the keypad and typed in 666. Immediately following my depression of the third 6, I heard 3 audible clicks in the booth, each with a kind of secondary or back click to it, kind of like how a machine gun might sound if you fired 3 shots with no bullets, like a clickety-clickety-clickety-click. These finished quickly, and a second and a half maybe followed by an immediate and complete seizure of the whirring fan, leaving nothing but dead silence inside the phone booth, save for the raindrops that you can now hear pattering on the roof. The receiver now had no sound. It was like having a rock up to my ear. I stood completely still as a chill came over me. I stared at the keypad for about 5 seconds, hung up the receiver proper, and I said, I want to wait in the blowing rain. And then I exited the booth, closed the doors, crossed the street, and waited an additional 7 to 10 minutes for the bus in the rain. If anything, I wonder how or why I punched so many numbers into that keypad over the course of a few minutes with no effect, yet my 666 call seemed to be immediately received. Shortly after this, I was transferred to a new work location, which didn't bring me to that particular spot anymore. When I finally did have cause to return to the location, the booth was gone. Victim of low revenues, the proliferation of cell phones, or 976 evil. I will never know. But I think about the incident often, and when I do, I still kind of get that same wry smile, chuckle, and chill. He says, I'm glad to discuss this just so long as it's not from within a phone booth. So, yeah, I mean, that could just be coincidence that he pressed enough numbers and everything just shorted out. But, yeah, the fact that he did it like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I said, not a lot to the story. Very well written. And this is one of those stories. I mean, he wrote this very well. You know, it's a very well written story. But it sounds like something that genuinely happened. There's no reason. I have no reason to doubt him whatsoever.
Yeah. I think if you were writing fiction, there would have been a voice from the other end of one sort, which I was hoping for. I must say, I was hoping that you would get a voice.
So yeah, nice and creepy. And I think partially creepy because he wrote it out so well. Really gives you the feel of the place.
Yeah.
I can picture myself being there and having that happen.
I think I might have dialed 1313 now instead of 666, just personally.
Why?
I don't know. I think that's where my mind went to, because as you're reading, you said, "What numbers do you dial?" I went, "Well, 1313, right?"
Huh. I probably would have gone with 666. All right. So this is a follow-up. This one, her story was featured on the 21619 listeners' stories episode, talking about the poltergeist who washed up after flushing the toilet. And we had asked, she had said she had more stuff going on. So we asked her for those, and she has included a few of them. So let me make this bigger so it's a little easier to read. There we go. She says, I was around 13 from 2002, 2003 time period when weird noises started in the house. So right there, that's exactly when people are most sensitive to this stuff generally. Those progressed as footsteps on the second floor when no one was there. The incident where my dad and I heard footsteps come up the stairs occurred during that time. It was the first time my dad had an experience around that time. Something I never had the courage to look at also started sitting at the foot of my bed a few months after things started. The bed would noticeably dip, and it was always as I was trying to fall asleep. I never experienced sleep paralysis, and when this particular situation would occur, I would not be able to fall asleep until the feeling of weight on my bed left. We had things go missing all the time. Usually little things. It got to the point my mother would joke that whatever went missing got sucked into a black hole. The items reappeared 2 to 4 months later near where they were last seen. The most notable incident I had with my car keys. They went missing one time while I was in college. Thankfully, I had a spare set, and vanished for 3 months, only to reappear in their normal spot I had checked dozens of times. But I think scissors are the items that go missing the most, and they're the least likely item to be found again. I did see a few things move on their own without any known cause, but those were fairly rare incidents. Now, all of that stuff falls right into the poltergeist category. The smell of cigarette smoke started wafting through the apartment, or through the house around that time too. My parents don't smoke cigarettes. Dad would have an occasional cigar, but never in the house. The neighbors weren't smokers either. The first instance of that was around 11 p.m. on a school night. The smell just appeared in the middle of the living room, and getting spooked, I walked into the kitchen and then came back out to see if it was still there. It wasn't, until the smell suddenly came up from behind me, so I did the normal cool teenager thing and ran upstairs as quietly as possible to hide in my bedroom. I think I was about 14 when I saw a figure who is called Bill. I was standing in the living room for some reason, and when I glanced at the couch, there was a solid black figure sitting on the couch with his legs crossed and his arms behind his head, where my dad liked to sit. It would have been a little taller than my dad if it stood and its shoulders weren't as broad. He was gone when I did a double take. I opened up to my dad about the figure, who mentioned it to my mom. She said it sounded like Bill. Bill was her neighbor when she was a kid, who helped look after her when her parents were going through a nasty divorce. After he passed away, he appeared to her in the townhouse my parents shared in the early mid-'80s. He regularly visited her, and according to my dad, used to wake her up to point at the clock. Dad said the time usually correlated with the lottery numbers for that week. That's pretty handy.
Yeah.
He joked that Bill didn't think he could take care of Mom and wanted to make sure she was financially stable. She never did play those numbers for some reason, and Bill stopped visiting her a couple years before I was born. He never showed himself to my dad. The height and body shape of the shadow matched Bill's, and he was a cigarette smoker, which I never knew until I was told. My aunt showed me a picture of Bill when I was in my early 20s, but he didn't look familiar. This figure also never showed itself to my mother after the weird things started when I was a teen. Bill just doesn't seem to fit a normal ghost story to me. He seemed attracted to my mother and not his family for some reason. She never had any items from him. He followed her to a new house and had a period of inactivity for over a decade before showing himself to me and letting my dad hear him. We also had a second spirit appear while I was in college, who used to like to stand at the corner of our dining room as a semi-translucent shadow. Both Dad and I saw him. Mom didn't. That one had the musty odor of sweat and dirt that a construction worker would. Since my grandfather passed shortly before his appearance, we chalked that one up to him. My mother never saw that particular ghost. I developed severe sleepwalking around the same time the weird experiences started. The sleepwalking began with me having a dream that I went into my mother's room and turned her light on and then off. I found out that a few days later my mom woke up to me flipping on and off her light switch the same night that I had the dream. It was bad enough that the sleepwalking happened a couple of times a week. According to my parents, it sounded like I was running around the downstairs. While I was a notoriously violent sleeper growing up, there wasn't any indication it would develop into sleepwalking. Several nightmares also occurred during that time frame, and I developed a very intense fear of crowds during those years and a strong dislike of silence. The weird events mostly stopped after I moved out, and to my knowledge, I haven't had any in my new house. Something interesting to note is that things were usually quiet during the winter. The activity would usually pick up around the spring equinox and would be the most active between the fall equinox and Halloween. I did previously mention that my dad had several deja vu moments. He also destroys watch batteries and had notorious bad luck with electronics. Both he and myself experienced more than a couple situations which should have been fatal. So that's an interesting array of stuff.
Yeah, I've noticed this with some stories I get with strange familiars. There is a propensity for people to familiarize ghosts. And by that I mean, without necessarily having a clear image of them, they'll say, oh, that must be Grandpa, or that must be, Fred from down the street or whatever. It's come up a few times in the Flannel Man accounts recently where people just said, oh, I just assumed it was my dad. What did it look like him? Well, no, but my dad had died, and it wasn't until I heard your stories and I realized this thing was wearing a red flannel shirt and blue jeans, and now it's, now I think it's something else. But I wonder if that's just a tendency for people to like, oh, it must be, we have a ghost, it must be someone familiar.
That's certainly a possibility. I mean, I think just, if nothing else, ghost culture has kind of created that idea that if you're seeing something in the house, it must be someone you know that's passed away, or a relative or friend or something like that, too.
Yeah. And that's, that is a mountain I don't know if I want to climb, because as hard as the, convincing some Bigfoot people that it might not be a long-lost gorilla in the woods has been, or at least to get them to open their mind about the things that point to it maybe being that. The dead looks I get, no pun intended, at paranormal conventions when I talk to ghost people and even suggest maybe it's not dead people. Just the blank stares they give me, like I'm the dumbest person on earth. Like, how could you even suggest such a thing? And then turn and walk away. As I thought, like maybe that's the next bridge. The next thing I'll take on. I don't know if I have that in me. That might be a mountain that's too high to climb.
Well, I think in some cases it's exactly what it seems. It's the spirit of a dead person. But I think sometimes we're either we're getting one of those wandering pieces of consciousness, and we're putting the identity of someone that's passed away on them, or it's something masquerading.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like sometimes, and not demons. Sometimes the other, whatever it is, might be using that shape and form, for another purpose, or because coming to you in the form of grandpa is a little less scary than coming to you in the form of a gray alien or a Bigfoot or whatever.
Right. All right. So this story comes from, also I wanted to say, obviously this stuff happened to her around 13. It started, she said, which is the time period, of course, where, poltergeist phenomena is strongest.
Yes.
And, the stuff that followed that might have just made her, if this Bill person was really a ghost of someone named Bill, it may very well be that she was just more sensitive to it at that point, and so he started appearing, or she was giving him energy to be able to appear.
Mm-hmm.
And also the location, or maybe not even the location, but maybe the proximity to her father, who clearly had some stuff going on too, may have brought this stuff out in her. So maybe location, because it's not happening to her in their new house. So something there, whether it be the spot or being with her parents, who may have been building on that information, building on that energy, may have helped some of this stuff come out.
Somewhere I saw a chart which had ages of children, male and female, and the spikes for poltergeist activity at the different ages. Mm-hmm. For the different sexes, which was really, really interesting. And like that 13 is the prime time for females especially. But I've been kind of looking at like when people tell me poltergeist story and looking at the chart, and boy, there's it seems to fit.
That's not surprising.
Yeah,
you figure it's there's a lot of stuff going on with people when they hit that age.
Oh yeah.
And emotions and stuff like that definitely power this stuff.
And if we want to talk about liminal periods, I mean, is there any more liminal time in your life? Maybe as you're getting ready to pass or something, but until then, I mean, that's incredibly liminal stage.
And you're also, you're repressing certain things you don't understand about yourself, trying to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much going on at that age as a teenager. Oh, yeah. All right. So the next one comes from Torin, and he had originally left it as a comment on a YouTube video. And, okay, so he says, when I was very young, probably around 3, I was living in a house in Newcastle, Washington, with my mother, father, and older sister. I still believe I was asleep and just having a very lucid dream because it felt very real. In my dream, I woke up in my room and went to get a glass of water. I walked back down the hall, down the stairs, got my glass of water, and went back upstairs. As this was happening, I started to feel more and more scared, so instead of going left to my room at the top of the stairs, I went right to my parents' room. I walked in the doors and saw them sleeping. I said something to try and wake them, but they were sound asleep. I continued to lock the door behind me because I was feeling more and more fearful. I then walked over to a wardrobe next to my parents' bed and thought there was something hiding in it, so I locked that too. After I did that, I turned around to face the bathroom across from the foot of the bed. I remember dropping my water because there was a tall man emerging from the door frame, completely black like solid smoke or shadow. I don't remember any distinguishing features other than it looked like a man, and given I was very young, quite tall to me. I was petrified and couldn't move. This figure proceeded to come towards me, and I turned and grabbed the post of the bed frame, screaming for my mom to wake up and help me. The figure was pulling me by my ankles toward the bathroom. I was suspended between the bed frame and this figure. I continued to scream for my mother, and she finally woke up, but my father continued to sleep. I'll never forget the look of terror on her face. She ran over to me, grabbed me by my arms, and was pulling me away from this thing in a twisted kind of tug-of-war. That's the last thing I remember from the dream. For the longest time after this, I didn't think it was a dream, yet couldn't remember it as vividly as I could later on. So I'd asked my mom if my dad and her ever played tug-of-war with me because they were going through a divorce during that time. She would always say no. I was scared of bathrooms for a long time, wouldn't go to sleep unless the door was shut. When I was older, around 12 to 14, I could remember this dream vividly and asked my mom about it. When I told her what I remember, she looked really creeped out and said that she had the same dream. That has always weirded me out, and I've just about come to terms with the fact that probably something tried to abduct me. The only other info I could get on this was from my brother, who lived there for a while too, and he said that when he was in that house, he was 17 and was experimenting with astral projection. He did it one night successfully, but was only in the house. He told me he had walked into our parents' bedroom and went to the bathroom and felt something very dark in there, but he didn't see anything. He's the only other person I've had a connected dream with, although ours was much different because I was awake and saw something and he was asleep, but that's a different story. The fact that I remember that so vividly still creeps me out. I had 2 other nightmares there that were some of the most terrifying ones of my life, still very vivid in my memory, but had 2 other figures or entities, whatever you want to call them. I always just brushed them off as normal nightmares, but given that I don't remember much at all of living in that house, it's crazy how dreams or experiences like that have stayed with me all these years. I'm 20 now, about to turn 21. Thought you might enjoy this story. By the way, I've seen shadow people more than once in my life, but I was actually awake, and the friend I was with saw them too. They darted right past us, almost through us. Didn't feel malicious at all, though. So, I'm wondering if he's capable of sharing his dreams. Because he says he shared one with his brother there. He didn't go into detail.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if maybe he has some psychic ability that he just doesn't have any control over.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't think there. See, I get so many of these stories of I guess Keel called them, bedroom invaders or nighttime invaders, that my head just goes right there immediately now with any of these stories. It's people either are confident they were awake 100%, or they're not sure. I'm not sure. It seemed like I was awake,
Mm-hmm.
But the variety of things that seem to come into people's houses and specifically bedrooms at night is pretty crazy.
Well, again, that's that liminal point, and it's you're more open to an alternative mode of thinking, altered states and such.
Take a drink.
Exactly. But it's true. I mean, that state, going into that dream state, that in between state is, where you're more likely to potentially perceive things.
Absolutely.
So that was definitely a creepy story.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had the shadow things run by me before. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I used to see it all the time, right around spring. Like the other person was saying there, she said that the stuff was strongest between spring and like Halloween. And right around spring, I'd be driving along and I would see shadow things dart across the road in front of me, and they weren't animals. Like, I've seen enough animals. I mean, these things would be right in the headlights, and they'd still be shadows. And I remember a friend and I arguing in front of her house one night, and I don't remember what we were arguing about because we didn't argue that much, but all of a sudden these black shapes just zipped by us and zipped around us, and they were just very solid shadows. And we both just kind of stopped and watched that, and then she just went, "So did you see that?" And I said, "Yep." And the argument just kind of ended at that point.
Now, were these like what people describe as that kind of blacker than black?
Yes. Yeah. But they moved almost more like animals, I always considered them some sort of nature spirit,
mm-hmm.
because most often I would see them in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't seen them in years. I haven't seen anything like that in years.
Having never seen, like a shadow person, I'm very, very interested in that description, because people, like, the way it's been explained to me is they say it seems like it has dimension, but it's hard to tell because they're so black.
Well, it's voidish.
Mm-hmm.
As if, light can't come out of it.
Right. Yeah. I've gotten that description too. So this is very, very interesting.
And I think Ren had suggested that possibly it's because they're drawing stuff into them to manifest in the first place. It's almost functioning like a black hole,
Maybe. I mean, I had a witness on, a couple episodes back who was just terrified because he saw a Bigfoot creature, but its face he said it was imploding. It was so black it was imploding.
Wow.
Yeah. So and it absolutely terrified him.
That's understandable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. So, but it just makes me think of that. Every time I talk to shadow people, people who've seen them, they describe it that same way. That's like blacker than black. It's like blacker than the night around it.
And there's also people who have seen, who see shadow people out of the corner of their eyes, and there's a trick of the eye when you catch them out of the corner of your eyes that may not be actual. Like it's hard. I'm trying to remember exactly how it works.
I remember I saw an explanation of that somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. That it can make you see something you're not, but it also, the way I forget which ones are which, because you have cones and rods in your eyes. But if you look up at the night sky, if you're in a really dark area, you look at the night sky, sometimes you can see more stars out of the corner of your eye than you can if you look right at them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the way the corners of your eye bring in, like, adjust to darkness is different than looking straight on. But the entire thing about how your eyes perceive things is different from the sides versus straight on. And I'm always more fascinated by the stories when people see these shadow people straight on. I mean, that's all the shadow people I've seen have always been straight on. And most weren't people. I've only seen one or two actual people. And the rest have all been like blobs or those things moving across the ground that look like they should be animals, but they're not. And they're always straight on. So I always look to see if people are seeing them straight on or out of the corner of their eye. Not that I dismiss it if they see it out of the corner of the eye, but it's far more interesting if they're seeing it dead on.
Yeah.
All right. So this one is similar. So they said, I have a very interesting experience as a child, and I'm not sure what I saw. I was between the age of 2 and 3, and it was during the night when this happened. I'm not sure what time, but it was dark in my room, but not so dark where I couldn't see anything. I was wide awake, just lying in bed, and I saw a bunch of these monsters. As a child, I would describe them as being monsters, but what they looked like were probably 2 to 3 feet tall and wide, and they were circular and hairy, and they had legs and feet and arms as well. They were grayish, blackish, and their hair was as well. There were several around my room, probably like 10 to 12 of them. I'm 16 now. I can't remember exactly how their faces looked. All I know is that they were very ugly and scary looking. Or to me, they were very ugly and scary looking. They were all just looking at me, and I was wide awake. I even covered my face with a blanket for a few seconds, and when I lowered the blanket off my face, I saw that they were still there, so I put the blanket over my face again and took it off, and they were still there. Then after that, I'm not sure what happened. I don't know how I fell asleep or anything. Later, it was early in the morning at dawn, around 5 or 5:30 in the morning, and my mom came to check on me, and I was sitting up in bed, and I told her that these things were making faces at me. She told me it was just the wall, because the walls of my room looked like faces. They were light brown, but the shapes made faces that were dark, or the shapes that made faces were dark brown, and I never really liked my room because of the walls. But I told her no, it wasn't the walls, and I pointed around the room. My mom still clearly remembers when I told her about this, and later that day when I saw my dad in the kitchen, I even told him about what happened that night. To this day, I don't know what I saw, and I've tried researching it and looking it up. I found stuff about shadow people, but they weren't shadow people. They didn't look at all human. I haven't found out anything about what I saw anywhere on the internet. So, Tim?
Oh, well, again, we have these bedroom invaders, but...
exactly.
Yeah, these sound like weird little cousin-its, right?
They sound like critters.
Yeah.
Is that the movie I'm thinking
did
of?
he describe them as black as well?
Grayish.
Grayish, yeah.
But
and again, like the certain he was awake, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that they said it was gray. And of course, I can't find that. But yeah, like the description makes me think of the movie Critters.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of rounded things with the big faces and the arms and the legs and kind of dark grayish.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I wouldn't lay money on it, but someone somewhere is hearing this and going, I saw those same things. That's the other thing I found with this stuff is, you know, people are seeing, like, one person will bring it up and other people will be like, yeah, I saw that. Not to the extent of Flannel Man. That's been the amazing, like, home run with that stuff. But almost everything we've talked about has been, you know, other people have said, yeah, I've seen that same thing.
And they said they wonder if there's anyone else who's seen anything similar or what these entities might be. And I don't know you're going to identify them necessarily.
Right.
I mean, even if you do, it doesn't necessarily tell you what you, I mean, like calling it Flannel Man doesn't really tell you what it is.
No, exactly. And there's not just one. Like that, I'm fairly confident in saying that people are seeing different things that are for some reason clothed similarly, but are not the same entity. As far as that goes, but I can't tell you what purpose he's there for, you know?
Right. So as far as other people experiencing this, I'm betting there's someone out there listening who's had this something similar. And
yeah.
It sounds similar to shadow people, although he or she is not describing them as blacker than black.
Right.
It sounds like an actual form there. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it may not really be what it seems like it is anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, I've never heard of this specifically, but like I said, I'm sure someone out there, you know, someone will say, "Yeah, I've seen those," or "I saw those," you know, as a child too, or whatever the case may be.
So if you have stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. All right, I'll do this other one because it's similar, I guess, in a sense. It's called Leprechaun. And, this person says they have some other stories I'm very curious to hear about. This comes from Jason. This story takes place when I was around 6 years old. I was young enough that my brother and I took naps in the afternoon. I distinctly remember waking up just in time to see a tiny figure standing on the windowsill out my bedroom window. He was the size of a large songbird, such as a robin or blue jay, and he turned away from the window and jumped down from the sill. Of course, he was gone by the time I ran over to look. I refer to him as a leprechaun, but that is likely because it was St. Patrick's Day when this happened. That said, he was not dressed in green like leprechauns are typically depicted. His clothing was various shades of brown and had some ragged, sometimes flared edges, making it seem like he was clothed in old leaves. His hat was shaped much like a bell with a wedge cut out for his face, and was so large that it dropped all the way down to his shoulders. It seemed that he was wearing an overcoat made of the same brown leaf-like material, a matching vest underneath in a lighter shade of brown. The whole encounter lasted mere moments, but it's still so vivid that I can recall him even 30 years later. Where's Josh when we need him?
Yes, sorry, had my mic muted. Yeah, that's wild. I'm trying to. It calls to mind another story. I don't know if it was on Where Did the Road Go or Strange Familiars. Boy, that's something, huh? Of a guy looking out his window on Christmas and thought he saw Santa Claus.
I haven't heard that one. That must have been you.
Okay, unless it was maybe it was another podcast I heard it on. Boy, that's in any case. Saw a guy or an entity sort of dressed in reddish, and you know he was a little kid. And because it was Christmas Eve or Christmas or near Christmas, assumed it was Santa Claus, but it was it ended up being pretty scary looking in the end. You know, hey, why not a leprechaun? You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that stereotype of that particular type of little person probably came from Fey encounters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it did. Like I said, if Josh was here, he could probably tell us the whole history of the leprechaun image.
Oh, yeah.
But the fact that it wasn't dressed in green and had sort of a nature look to it with what looked like leaves, I mean, that's not a typical sort of description of it either.
No, but I'm sure there's something in the catalog of Fae that meets that description. And
Yeah.
Josh would be like, oh yeah, that's a whatever it is.
Exactly. All right. So this one's an older story that I never got to. It's entitled After Listening to the Jeff Ritzmann Interview Part 1. And this was sent back on June 11th, 2016. So yeah, I'm a little behind on some of these. Basically, I'm trying to keep up with the new ones and then going back and getting some of the ones from the furthest back I can find. So
yeah, I had a segment on the latest Strange Familiars where I just apologize to people for email. It's just I'm doing my best. I know you do your best. It's so hard.
It is.
It's so hard to keep up.
And I appreciate the emails. It's not
absolutely.
It's not that we don't want to hear from you.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not trying to be rude. It's a lot. There's a lot of email that comes in.
So this one, he says, after listening to the first part of the Jeff Ritzmann interview, I decided I'd share some of my experiences. I've been plagued with paranormal experiences all my life, and since then, I've learned that my experiences aren't so different from other people with whom paranormal is a part of their lives. There was a detail that Jeff Ritzmann had mentioned from his early childhood that surprised me. I'll point this out when I get into it in the story. He entitles it Hooded Figures. My first encounter with hooded figures came when I was 18 years old. The week leading up to the event, I had been ill. I rarely get sick, but when I do, I'm off my feet until it's run its course. In the early hours of morning, I had a nightmare that involved a crashed UFO. Here's the other UFO dream. I awoke suddenly, and when I opened my eyes, there were 3 hooded, monk-like figures at the foot of my bed. The cowls hid their faces, and their hands were hidden within the folds of their sleeves as they held them in front. They were evenly spaced at the foot of my bed. My first thought was, please don't take me, and I was surprised by my response that I almost got sidetracked by the thought, wondering why I would think that. But I returned my focus to the beings at the foot of my bed. I withdrew my legs quickly and pressed my back up against the headboard. I pulled the sheets up to my neck, as if that could protect me, and stared at them, terrified. At that point, they began to fade away. I felt relieved, but they became solid once more before disappearing completely. The second time I saw a hooded figure happened to be one of the worst times of my life. I had been struggling with the acceptance of an alien presence in my life, and I was trying anything and everything that I could think of to avoid engaging it. I had an abduction experience about 6 years prior that triggered a flood of my memories that had let me try this again. I had an abduction experience about 6 years prior that triggered a flood of my memories, and that hidden life that seemed to run parallel to my normal life irrevocably changed me forever. I was living by myself and was working a high-stress job during the time. I specifically asked to work nights because I thought that if I could work nights and sleep during the day, that would hamper their efforts at taking me whenever they wanted. I was wrong, of course. One morning, I had a nightmare that involved a sci-fi show that I like to watch when I awoke suddenly. I was in the midst of sleep paralysis, with only being able to move my eyes. At the foot of my bed stood a single hooded figure. Instead of being terrified, I was enraged. I exerted a lot of effort to raise my right arm. I was trying to reach out and grab a hold of that being that stood at the foot of my bed so I could beat the crap out of it. I was able to lift my arm up, but I became very tired and passed out. I awoke 2 hours later feeling better. Maybe a month or 2 later, I was still struggling with that part of my life, and I guess that it was really beginning to show. One of the guys I worked with asked me what was going on. I was very hesitant to divulge any information because I had the distinct feeling that my experiences weren't meant to be shared. We had a few minutes between shifts, so I was intentionally vague in what I told him. I told him I was struggling with accepting changes in my life and that I was having nightmares and some weird experiences, etc. But I refused to discuss anything in detail, included hooded figures. After listening to my brief explanation, he told me he'd like to pray over me. My co-worker was a devout Christian, so I told him that sounded good. I knew that it wouldn't help in any way possible, but I figured that it also wouldn't hurt. I sat with him as he prayed for me. I thanked him afterwards and told him good night. I saw him 2 days later. After I had been in the office for a few minutes talking with him, he told me something weird happened to him that night after he left work. He said that after going home and going to sleep with his wife, he woke up and found he couldn't move. There was movement besides the bed, and he moved his eyes to see a hooded figure standing close to him. He said that the being stepped forward and reached out to grab his forearm. My coworker said that the being had long, bony fingers. He said that the being said nothing, yet conveyed an intense feeling to him. My coworker said that he had never felt such a feeling of intimidation before in his life. Once the feeling was communicated, the being released its grip and took a step back. My coworker said the next thing he remembers was waking up in the morning. As I listened to his story, I was horrified that I had inadvertently brought that presence into his life. He had no previous paranormal occurrences in his life before that event. What bothered me so much is that I didn't even talk about the hooded figures that I had seen, and yet it had visited him as well. The next incident happened a short while after that. A friend and I were working at the same job, and he asked me what had been troubling me as we both left work one night. We stood out in the parking lot and talked for a while. This time, I spoke about some of the events, including seeing hooded figures. My friend told me he hadn't seen anything like that before. Strangely, though, he shared with me a UFO sighting that he had seen over the town that I used to live in before moving closer to work. We said our goodbyes and we went our separate ways. The following day, I worked with him again. Later that evening, when we had a spare moment, my friend shared an experience he had when he went to bed the night before. My friend told me that he woke up later that night with sleep paralysis. Only able to move his eyes, he scanned the room. My friend said that he spotted movement on the far side of the room. He said that there was a hooded figure standing near the far wall watching him. After a couple of minutes, the hooded figure turned and walked out of the bedroom. My friend said at that point he fell asleep. The last incident happened a couple of years ago. Or a couple years later, I'm sorry. I was working in retail. I was lifting a bike to place it in the rack when it slipped and struck my right temple. There was a small gash, but nothing serious. After going to bed that night, I began to dream. As I was dreaming, something strange that hasn't happened to me before or since occurred. It was like a person's point of view was superimposed over my dream. It was of me lying on my left side, sleeping in my bed. I was facing away from the person who was standing beside my bed. Through this point of view, the person leaned over me and reached out with their hand. With one long bony finger, the person gently touched the wound that was on my right temple. What seemed alarming, and up to this point I've never mentioned, was that the fingers had long black nails, almost like claws. I opened my eyes and found that I was indeed lying on my left side. I wasn't paralyzed or afraid. I considered turning over to see if the hooded figure was standing there, but I didn't. I closed my eyes and went back to sleep. The long bony fingers with black nails seemed too strange to tell anyone, so I've always left that out of the story when I've told the story. Hearing Jeff Ritzman share that one detail surprised me because I really thought I was the only one to have seen something like that.
Yeah. Never the only one.
So that one's really interesting for a few reasons. It's interesting that it seems like he's able to transfer it somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's two people he told the story to who had the same experience. I mean, the second one he mentioned hooded figures, so you can put some question in there whether or not that influenced the experience, but the first one he obviously didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen hooded figures, but again, only in altered states of consciousness. I've never seen them in a physical state. And Jeff obviously had that experience with hooded figures as well. So I don't know why hooded figures. I'm sure, again, if we say, hey, if you've had experience with hooded figures, stories at whereDidTheRoadGo.com, we're probably going to get a bunch of hooded figure story because I don't think that's that rare. And it's interesting because it has that sort of culty sort of archetype, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Monks and cults and things like that.
It rang a couple bells for me. The wanting to strike out at the invaders or abductors. I absolutely had that. I was enraged. The one time that I can remember 3 being at my bedside, absolutely enraged and wanted to. I mean, I've never been so angry in my life. Really, really wanted to punch them. But the other thing, talk about transferring experiences. I had, at this point, of my life only told that abduction thing to Allison. So this is back in the early '90s, and we were over at a friend's house, and we kind of spent the night, watching movies and stuff, and talking to him, and eventually like turned to talking about weird stuff. And he was the second person I told about the stuff, and it was very personal moment for me to share that with him. It was very it felt very vulnerable, and like, I know this sounds crazy, and just that, I talk about it a lot now, but I hadn't talked about it at all then. Like I said, I told Allison and pretty much no one else, and told this fellow the story. And then we went back to Allison's parents' house and went to sleep in her bedroom. And that night is when Allison had her flannel man experience.
Oh, okay.
She woke up to flannel man standing at our feet. Saw the entity in the red flannel, described him like a lumberjack. She woke me up screaming. I didn't see it. But I carried a little bit of guilt. Before I knew flannel man was a thing, I carried a lot of guilt around with me because I thought, she had that dream because I talked about it with our friend that night, my abduction experience with the thing standing over my bed, And I always kind of had a little tinge of guilt because of that, because I thought she had a bad nightmare because of what I described, and then of course that experience has led to this amazing journey that we've had through Strange Familiars with this flannel man thing. But
and that's where I say there's no such thing as coincidences. That happened for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, apparently so. Yeah, and I guess I transferred. Instead of grays, she saw flannel man. I guess you can make that argument.
Right. And who's to say that either of them are actually what they are?
Exactly.
And I would argue that they're not.
But I think to me it's just incredibly powerful that it was the second time I've opened up to any person on Earth and told them that story, and then we go back to her bedroom that night, and that's where she has this incredible experience.
The hooded figures actually make their way into the fictional movie I've done, Gateways to Magonia, which you can watch on the site or on YouTube or Vimeo or wherever you want to check it out. It's totally free, and it definitely. My goal was to kind of put you in the frame of mind of what people who have these experiences go through. The sort of back and forth of what's going on, what's real,
mm-hmm.
and how things sort of cross over a little bit. Things that seem like they were completely imaginal in some way somehow have an effect on actual reality, which really should be making more people question what reality really is.
Yeah. I mean, that's the big question with all this, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my goal in doing this show is to sort of kind of come up with better questions to figure out what we are,
mm-hmm.
where we are, what we are. And I've always said the UFO phenomena, I think, is the best place to look for that because it seems to encompass the most stuff and the weirdest stuff. But all of this, I mean, it's all connected. It's obviously connected. It's connected to the way that we interact with reality and what we do and don't know about ourselves.
Right.
Because so much of it seems to be a mirror of ourselves, but yet there also seems to be an other behind it.
Yeah, exactly. It feels very much like some sort of energy interacting with us in some way. Now, whether that's the old gods, or just, you want to call it was it the great god Pan? The return of Pan. You want to call it aliens, or just the other? At this point, it makes a little difference to me what name you want to put on it. But it does feel like it's something reacting and interacting with us both.
And I think that putting any name on it is limiting to it.
It is. It absolutely is.
I try to just deal with it as, like as openly as I possibly can and not think of it as something.
Mm-hmm. Because we really don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I think, the other, which we use frequently here, and
is probably the best term.
Yeah, just because it's something that is not us.
And the fact that our beliefs and our consciousness seem to have an effect on reality, even if it is only in some of this stuff or when you're practicing magic or any of it, it shows you just how powerful and we really are. I mean, we may not be able to control it, but it's there. I mean, we can potentially literally shape reality. And we're probably doing it all the time and we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
it's a background process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's again, I think it's just sort of sliding scale of, hard reality versus these more mutable zones we get in these liminal states.
Yeah. And I'm not sure how much hard reality there really is.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And were I able to look through your eyes, I mean, green might not look green,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that always gets thrown out there as like that old stoned hippie idea. And it's like, yeah, but it's a really good point because we don't know what's what.
Yeah, exactly. We've come to an agreement,
Yeah.
Time is a great example. We've agreed to organize something that is completely a concept, but we've agreed on this method of organization so we don't go insane, basically. I mean,
yeah, but I mean, we don't know that we're seeing anything remotely like the other is seeing,
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
Because everything's only vibration. Our brain puts a picture to it, and maybe that's part of what why some people think something looks beautiful and someone else thinks it looks ugly. I mean, I'm sure some of it's life experience and such, but maybe some of it's just that it looks completely different through someone else's eyes.
Yeah.
That color combination through someone else's eyes is awful, but through another person's eyes, it's a really nice color combination.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to make sure I got this in. This wasn't so much a story, but I was waiting to have you on to talk about it. So this comes from a listener, Satina, over in the UK. And she said, I just wanted to let you know that in Islamic lore, there is a creature similar to Bigfoot called the Jassasa. And in Arabic, it means spy. The legend of this creature was narrated in the Hadith, sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, and the creature fits the description of such. And she says, I didn't know that, and I'm surprised no one has mentioned this before.
I mean, I'm not the least bit surprised. Every culture has a wild man. There's not a culture that doesn't. People say Indonesian cultures don't. Yeah, they do. They do. Every culture has a form of wild man. They're most often big and hairy, and have a lot of the same traits. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm not the least bit surprised. There's also in the Middle East they talk about ghouls, which Ghul, which can also be big hairy things that eat dead people. So there's more than one.
She mentioned a few other things that were kind of interesting based on Islamic lore. She said on the subject of Muhammad's night journey to heaven, he was asked about his journey and he threw his brass ring into the desert floor and said to his companions that our world is within that brass ring. And then he said he saw millions of rings as he traveled from one to the next.
Cool. That's a cool image.
And she said, what did he see? Was it other dimensions or whatever? And yeah, that's a cool image. And it's a really interesting, it definitely fits with what, the kind of stuff we talk about with multiple dimensions and stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love that description. I mean, just absolutely poetic.
And she said on the subject of jinns, there are different types. Ifrit jinn that can propel itself at great speeds in the sky, jinns that can imitate the dead, jinns that can enter object, jinns that can shapeshift, jinns that can enter the body of people and animals. Jinns cannot alter their environment as they inhabit the same space as ours, like a parallel dimension. That frustrates them when a building or object is created in our world, it also appears in their world. Kind of like the upside down world in Stranger Things. Jinns have certain advantages over man, and likewise, we do have advantages over them. And that makes me think of Laird Scranton's, when he talks about the Dogon and the teachers saying that there's that our reality has imperfect knowledge, but the ability to change, where the other mirror reality has perfect knowledge, but inability to change. Jinns were known to the Arabs even before the advent of Islam. Jinns could be some other sentient creature that the Arabs simply call jinn. The tradition goes very far back. And she said, jinn are a very popular explanation for weirdness nowadays, but I don't know how much people attribute to them as accurate to tradition.
Mm-hmm.
The jinn are told in the Quran were the original heritors of the earth. But we do know out of the 25 prophets named in the Quran, 5 are Arabian prophets, so such tales could have been passed from one tribe to another. And yeah, the jinn are a very popular thing. But again, we're talking again about spirits of the dead earlier, and it says right there the jinn can sometimes mimic spirits of the dead.
Yeah.
It's just another word to categorize this stuff. Really,
it is. It's another word. I mean, I think you could use fairy as well as jinn. You know what I mean? Either they're pretty interchangeable.
Trying to see if there's anything else here. I kind of copied it off of Facebook, so I'd have it here, and it didn't quite copy in an easy-to-read format.
I was saying with Allison on the latest episode of Strange Familiars, I was saying, like, this is folklore, and it's kind of whispering down the lane. So every culture adds their own sort of little flourishes to it. But if you take it back to the sort of root, we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, and actually, she just said, she says, so much has been changed and removed from the original texts that we will never know the truth of some of this stuff. Plus, every time it gets translated, things get lost. Yeah,
but I'm talking about the behaviors in the way these things act.
That's what stays.
Yeah.
Like sort of the archetype, basically.
We might drape different, clothing of them literally or figuratively, according to our culture and according to our, the time we live in and so forth. But the essence of these stories are very similar all over the world.
Yeah, and I thank her for sending that along because I did not know that.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. I mean, I love them. I love hearing all the different, folklore from the different cultures, and I'm not super familiar with. I happen to know about the ghoul because it came up in the Bigfoot book we're writing, but other than that, I'm not super familiar with that folklore.
Well, now you got something else.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so this one comes from Pamela, and it's entitled Scottish Nostradamus. And so she's talking about Bron Sear, Scotland's potential answer to Nostradamus. And she said, I was in my late teens when something happened to me that I cannot explain. I was sitting in a friend's room, and when I looked up, I saw an eye. Watery, moving, and semi-transparent like the reflection in a dark glass rather than a mirror. It was in the middle of the room. It was much larger than life, and I could make out individual eyelashes along the lid line. It reminded me of my own eye, but I knew it wasn't some magnified reflection, and I was wearing eyeliner, and it wasn't. I cautiously asked my friend if he could see anything strange in the room, and he said no. I blinked, looked away, and turned back, and to my horror, it was still there, and I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. The room was above an integrated garage, so the window was higher up in the wall than normal, and I knew nothing would be projecting in. Still, we checked out the window, and there was nothing to be seen, and the apparition faded away after a few more moments, but it left a lasting impression. Later, I told my mom about the strange occurrence. She's always skeptical about such things, but didn't dismiss it because she could see I was shaken by it. I expressed my concern that whenever anything inexplicable had happened to me in the past, there was usually a reason for it. Unfortunately, 3 months later, my dad was in a terrible accident, and the doctors had no choice but to remove his eye. Fast forward a couple of years to 1995 and to the airing of The Strange Show on Scottish television. It became available on YouTube, and I want to include the link, but it has since disappeared. It featured the story of Coinich Odar, I'm sure I'm saying that completely wrong since it's Scottish, the Bron Sear, of whom I had previously known nothing. It sent chills down my spine. Details like the blinding in one eye leading to the power of second sight and the names of people and places made it significant for me and my mum. Our jaws dropped as we watched it. You see, my dad's name was Kenneth. Coinich in Scots Gaelic. My mum's name is Isabella, like the lady he scorned and who called for his execution, and our family name is Peffer, as in Strathpeffer. Strath just means a cross, and Peffer is a flowing body of water. Where the seer lived and where the eagle stone still stands, cemented upright to prevent its falling a third time and bringing foretold catastrophe to the land. A few years ago, I shared my story with Margaret Bennett, the Scottish folklorist who presented that episode of The Strange Show. She was kind enough to say she enjoyed the tale, and I thought your listeners might like it as well. I've had many other strange occurrences and would be happy to share, but this one has the most significance for me. And she says she's also going to check out Duncan Lucan's Stone Circle this weekend from whenever she sent this, so that's cool. So yeah, it sounds like there's some weird interconnections between this Brahan seer and some of her experiences as well as her family names.
Yeah.
Again, talking about strange coincidences, but may or may not mean something. It's kind of hard to say in that case.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when it comes down to it, they meant something to her, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of times that's the most important thing, is if it means something to you, then it meant something.
Exactly. Yeah. I talked about this in relation to the Hellier show. Have you watched that yet?
I have not.
Okay. Without to give too much away, and I know we're going to talk about this at some point, there's a thing involving a tin can, and that's all I'll say. And some people have been like, so what? But my point is, well, you're not in it. It's not your journey. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it means something very much to them, in the show. And as an outsider, it cannot mean as much to you because you're not on that journey. You're watching that journey from the outside, And overall, I think they did an excellent job of conveying the feeling of awe when you're in this stuff and these synchronicities keep happening. Yeah. And they did a great job with that. That said, it's not my journey, it's theirs. I would have made some different choices and different decisions, I think, but you have to keep that in mind. Journey. Yeah, exactly. You have to keep in mind you're watching their journey, not yours. And I think it's very important. So this set of coincidences that you read from the listener, that's her journey, yep. And if they mean something to her, that's very important, And exactly. From us on the outside, they might not mean as much. It might be easy for us to say, "Wow, But
I'm not dismissing it at
all.
No,
me either, and I'm not either. I'm just saying, like, someone may, someone may say,
right.
But she was there and she knows,
All right, I got one more I think we can squeeze in here, and this one's fairly short and kind of a nice note. This is on sleep paralysis. And Kendra says, I thought I would share my thoughts on a unique perspective on this topic. I must tell you I've had many instances of sleep paralysis starting as far back as I can remember. Since I've had these experiences, I frequently discuss the subject with friends. I had a conversation with a girl recently who told me about her account of a sleep paralysis event, and it changed my view from the terrifying aspect of the subject. Her story started with the typical sleep paralysis scenario, being fully conscious and unable to move. She feels the weight of something pressing down on her chest. Then she felt and heard breathing close to her face. It lasted for what seemed like forever, and all she could do was wait and pray for it to go away. When it was finally over, she was so freaked out and she could hardly get back to sleep, and I fully understood. So when she said it almost reminded her of a dog, her German Shepherd, and what he used to do, it kind of set off a light bulb. I asked her when her dog passed away, and she said it would have been less than a year earlier. And I suggested to her that it might have actually been her dog, and she said she never thought of it. And she looked dazed at first, and a few seconds later started tearing up. And she says, oh my God, if your beloved and recently passed animal wanted to pay you a visit in the middle of the night, how else would they do it? They would probably be super excited for one final goodbye visit and not know how to properly greet you. Just saying it makes sense to me. And obviously she said she's aware it doesn't explain all sleep paralysis. She says, when it happens to me still, as a grown woman, I'm totally freaked out afterwards. Luckily, it doesn't happen that often anymore. But yeah, that's great. That's as good an explanation as anything.
Sure. Yeah.
And again, if it meant something to this woman when she suggested it, that's,
Yeah, absolutely. Sleep paralysis is a funny thing. I had been asking every guest, no matter what they came on for, if they had experienced sleep paralysis, and was beginning to think it was an indicator of the paranormal. because the overwhelming majority of guests, no matter what, whether it's Bigfoot, UFOs, whatever it is, the overwhelming majority have experienced sleep paralysis. Then someone related that the overwhelming majority of the population experiences sleep paralysis at some point.
At some point, yeah.
So there you go. It became less of an interesting survey after that.
Well, I think it depends on the type of sleep paralysis too, because I mean, there's real basic sleep paralysis, which is probably exactly what it seems. Your brain is woken up, but your body hasn't gotten that command to wake up yet. Kind of the opposite of sleepwalking. But then there's the altered state aspects, and there's the people who have passed it from one person to another, and I mean, there's connections in there that don't always make sense.
Yeah.
From a materialistic viewpoint, anyway.
Yeah. Now, my son, he won't let me talk about what he's experienced when he has had sleep paralysis, but he has had it, and I hated it. It was terrifying for me every time, and he has taken it in stride. He's like, yeah, it's really interesting. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because he told me about it. And I said, well, geez, I'm sorry, Gideon. And he said, no, it's a really interesting experience. And for him, it's just a very sort of natural, interesting thing that he kind of accepts as part of the sequence of, I guess, sleep and events that go along with it. Now, he said it's only happened to him a couple of times, but it has happened to him. And he's I'd rather have him have that attitude than mine. If he's going to experience it, he's very to him it's a if not positive, certainly an interesting experience for him.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting, but I find like experiences like that creep me out way more than stuff in real life. For some reason, in that sleep state, if something's going to creep me out, it's going to be there. Like, and even sometimes thinking about, like when I was talking about the sort of trickster entity that I dreamed about, like the dream would give me chills, but yet stuff moving in my house doesn't give me chills.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff moving in my house is just like, stop it, that's annoying. Now I have to fix it.
Right.
But I also suspect somewhat that's coming from my energy to some degree.
Yeah, and I think, to go back to these, bedroom invaders that we've been talking about, that, people feel really violated.
Oh, yeah, you're very vulnerable at that point.
Exactly, yeah.
What was I just going to say? Oh, I had an experience, was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. And I was wide awake. I had not fallen asleep yet. And there's way too many cats in this house. And usually only one of them jumps on the bed. But this other one, the sort of puffball one, has decided sometimes it'll jump on my bed now. And so the one that's normally in the bed had left, and I still was wide awake and trying to get to sleep. And I distinctly felt the weight of a cat. That's the biggest cat. And I distinctly felt the weight of the cat jump on the bed. And then I felt it take a step, and then it stopped. And I said, okay, Whisper. And I turned on the light, and there was nothing there. And I went, okay, that was something. Because it wasn't like I was half asleep or anything like that. And it was a very distinct feel, like a very distinct thud of something decently large jumping on the bed and then starting to walk and stopping.
Definitely Bigfoot.
Yeah, it was definitely Bigfoot. All right. Well, I think that's it for this week. If you have stories, please share them. Stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. That is the very best place to send them, because then they all end up in the same place, and I have much more of a chance of actually reading them. Of course, you can always send other stuff to contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com if you have questions or comments or stuff like that. All right. And Tim, where can people find you in the quite awesome Strange Familiars?
StrangeFamiliars.com, and then all of my books are on Amazon. Just look up Timothy Renner, and they'll all come up.
They're pretty awesome, too.
Well, thank you.
And I also wanted to real quickly, I got to find it here. Might have to use my phone. I wanted to thank, and I can't remember what their Patreon username is, UFO Weekly News, and it's actually a website. Bart at UFO Weekly News sent me these little cryptid creatures that he found on Etsy. And there's a Mothman, a Chupacabra, a Bigfoot, and a what's the last one? Something else. Jersey Devil. That's what the other one was.
I saw. Did you post those on Facebook?
I did. They were very cool. They're very, very fragile, but they're really cool. And they were really hard to take a picture of because they're black.
Yeah, they look neat though.
Yeah, they were very cool.
I like cryptids. Just saying.
But each cryptid came with a little card that told you, a little history about it.
That's cool. What are they made out of? Are they?
They're like very thin plastic.
Oh, okay, cool.
So they're not durable at all. I'm not sure where I'm going to put them where cats can't get at them, because I'm pretty sure if a cat gets at them, they will be no more. The Jersey Devil will be destroyed by a cat.
Yeah, which, hey, might mirror reality.
But anyway, thank you, Bart. They were very cool. And I guess that brings a close to tonight's show, and we'll be back next time. Thanks, Tim.
Oh, thank you.
And a special shout out to our patrons pledging $10 or more: Allison Cook, Lindsay Marie Trebet, Nick Martin, Super Inframan, UFO Weekly News, Tim, Maria, Nate Seriah, Jennifer Campbell, Mike McGuire, American Rambler, Paul Buscini, Kevin, Chris Johnson, 36 Dingo, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Ben Crow, Janet Runyon, Andy McNamara, Sasha Lorg, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Rogelio Gonzalez, Roland Belstadt, Robert Groom, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Craig Cisternos, Charles Beauregard, Matthias Sunby, Lindsey Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris, John Eddy, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.